You can stop harm that's happening in the world by living your life by your own morals and your own values and living your life as an example for other people to see. And I know that sounds really corny to say, but it is absolutely true. Like when people see that you live this way.
Let's take a quick moment to thank the people that support and sponsor the podcast. When life takes an unexpected turn, you deserve someone who will stand beside you. St. Louis attorney Chris Dully offers experienced one-on-one legal defense. Call 314-384-4000 or 314-DUI-HELP, or you can visit dullylawfirm.com. That's DULLE lawfirm.com for a free consultation.
When we speak the truth of what we've lived, we offer others a way through. Welcome to Hope Comes to Visit. I'm Danielle Elliott-Smith, and I'm so excited you're here. My guest today is Onika Mays. She is a mindfulness coach, yoga teacher, and master storyteller, and soon-to-be author. Onika, I am really excited you're here for so many reasons, but I feel like you could give us a masterclass in all of the things we're getting ready to talk about today. Thank you for being here.
I am so thrilled to be here. I am so excited to talk about all of the things today.
Oh gosh. I was reading over your bio, and when we were first talking about having you on the show, I was thinking, where do I even start, right? One of the things that I find so captivating about the work that you do is lots of people teach meditation. Lots of people teach yoga and mindfulness, but you specifically make sure that these practices, this level of love and wellness, reaches people who are traditionally left out of that particular circle.
I found mindfulness at a really low time in my life. I felt spiritually adrift. Someone who was close to me died, and the practice saved my life. I went to therapy for a long time, and I always say that meditation helped me thrive. Therapy saved my life, and meditation helped me thrive. And I wanted to share those practices with folks who I also felt like were ignored and lost, and it made sense to be in a jail. And traditional wellness spaces didn't seem like they fit people who look like me. So I felt like representation really mattered. And when I first went to a jail for the first time, I felt like I was at home. I didn't grow up in a traditionally religious household, but I felt like I understood what people meant when they got a calling when I first went to Rikers. And sharing practices in a jail with people who are forgotten meant everything to me. To be with folks and to bear witness to folks at a time that was really low in their life, I related to that. And I feel like a lot of people can relate to feeling trapped inside their lives, whether it's a true prison or a prison of their own making.
That's a beautiful way to capture that. Tell me, when I think about going to a closed environment like that, right? An environment where people have been through really, really hard things, I would imagine, being in recovery myself, having been around people who have been through very, very hard things, I know that we aren't often apt to say, I'm open to all things soft and spiritual. Did you find a welcoming environment? Did you find that Rikers said, sure, I'd love for you to come in with this? And then once you were in, did people who were incarcerated, did they say, sure, yoga, mindfulness, that sounds like a practice that might be helpful to me?
It varied. Sometimes, when I volunteered actually for about 6 years before I started working there full time. And when I volunteered, some people, even some officers were really open to the idea of seeing a yoga teacher come in and do these practices and say like, oh, this is really great. And then even officers would say like, we wish we had this. And some officers said like, people don't deserve this. And then folks who were incarcerated, some were open and some weren't. So it was really like a lot of the students that, I would occasionally teach in a yoga studio that I was in. But, I say that, these practices shouldn't be forced on people. So it was people some people would watch, and, I would teach classes in a dorm or in a cell area. So folks would see and they would watch. And if they liked it, they would come. And some people would come and didn't like it. And that, I think, is the important thing. When you're in an environment where someone says, they tell you when to eat, they tell you when to wake up, they tell you, you feel like you don't have agency over your body. Even the ability to say no to something, I don't want to do this, is a really big deal. So that element of choice, to say that I'm choosing this, that is actually giving somebody some liberation. So if somebody didn't like it, that still mattered. If somebody did like it, that mattered too. So some folks would try meditation and not like it, and we would do something else. And sometimes it's simply that conversation with somebody that, that change could happen and there was connection there. So it's not even the practice always, it's just being in community with people.
See, I love that, because you're giving people the choice, the option. And in that environment, there tends to be not as many options that are open for decision making, right? Mm-hmm. When you're in that environment and you are giving people this option, did you find that mindfulness or a certain level of spirituality or that yoga, that one practice was more well received than any other?
People, it's really interesting, because I think there's a lot of assumptions about people who are in jail. I think a lot of times people think that people in jail aren't spiritual or they aren't smart, but there's a lot of interest about spirituality in jail. A lot of people get in touch with who they are when they're in jail. There's a lot of time, believe it or not, to think. There is a lot of boring time in jail, believe it or not. So there's a lot of downtime. There's a lot of reading. So there were a lot of questions about meditation. I got lots of questions about chakra work when I was there. So there are all kinds of things. So for some people who are really physical, a physical asana practice, I would get lots of questions about. So when I was a mindfulness coach, I would work one-on-one with people. So I would have some people, it was like really having, a private yoga session with people. And we would get like down and dirty and do this heavy duty practice. And then for some people, it was really all about going inside, and people wanted to know deep questions about a deep spiritual meditation practice. So it could vary. And that would be so powerful. Some people would want to come see me right before court or right after court, or something would happen in their life, and they would actually even call down to my office to see if they could come see me to talk about something. So it was really based on the individual at the time. And I think that was the most beautiful thing about being able to do that work. It was like having my own practice inside the jail.
What did you find has been most transformative for you in choosing this path for your practice?
I learned that I didn't have to like people to love them.
I love that.
When you work inside an environment that's a jail, and especially an environment like Rikers Island, which is probably one of the most notorious jails in the country, I worked with a lot of people who I didn't like, and a lot of people who didn't like me. The jail's very conservative, and I am not conservative, and I'm queer, and there are a lot of people who didn't approve of me. And I didn't approve of a lot of people either. And we had to learn how to work together. And we did. And while they weren't people that I would break bread with, we learned how to work together. And I think my practice of metta, or loving kindness, really helped me get through that. And I realized like, oh, I don't have to like folks, but I do have to love them, and that transfer to the rest of my life. And, and P.S., there were a lot of people who I worked with who were incarcerated who I didn't like either. And I could still love them. And I think there were some people who worked with me who were incarcerated who didn't like me. And that was okay too. They liked the practice. And that, I think, especially in this environment that we're in now, is so transformative. I think sometimes we're so caught up in, I have to like this person, I have to agree with this person. And I just think we don't have to. And we've lost nuance. We've lost this ability to have like really healthy conflict with people. And now that I realize that I don't have to like people to love them, my life is so different.
See, and it's funny because I sometimes forget when I'm having these conversations, because I can see you and you can see me, that I'm nodding along and I'm nodding along. And there's so many people who are listening to this as compared to watching us. And I couldn't possibly agree with you more in terms of how we have lost nuance and we have lost the ability to love through dislike of position, and remember that love is so much more powerful than so many of these strong emotions we're experiencing as we witness what's happening around us.
Mm-hmm.
So when you are in the jail, and this is something you are still doing on a regular basis?
No, I actually stopped doing it in 2023 because I knew I wouldn't be able to write about it and still be working there at the same time.
Okay.
And there may be some people who read this book after they've, and they might have some feelings about some of the stuff that I wrote, because I realized after working there and sort of doing this work, I went in with kind of one approach, and it broke me. I mean, the truth is, I think even when I started to write this book, I thought I was going to write this very hopeful book. And there are elements of the work that were hopeful individually. But I think on a macro level, I couldn't hold the work anymore, because I think I made the jail look more palatable to people on the outside. Like, look at this woman. She's bringing meditation and yoga to Rikers. Like, how bad could it be? And I felt like I started to participate in the system more than I wanted to, because I'm an abolitionist. And I started to hold this, I couldn't hold that inside my body anymore. And while the work still needs to continue, and there's an incredible woman who I know and who I actually worked with, who's doing the work now, I couldn't do it anymore. So I had to leave.
I think that's part of the work that you teach, though, right? Recognizing your own boundaries and recognizing what you can take and what you can't. So this is a perfect segue into your book, Sit With Me, right? So tell us about the book. The book comes out on March 3rd.
Yeah, the book is about, it's three different things. It's a memoir about my own spiritual journey to learning how to love myself through all the messy parts. So it's part memoir. It's also a part teaching on the concept of metta, which is loving kindness. And it's more than about love. It's this unconditional friendliness. So it's a teaching on that. And it's also a book. It's like a field guide for folks who have felt lost or alone and who want to know, like, how can I learn how to love myself through all sorts of different circumstances? And especially now with, I think, people feeling confused and wanting to know, like, how can I make a change in the world? And wondering where do I start? And we start with ourselves. As trite as that may sound, I think it's true that it begins with us, and it begins by looking inside and recognizing that when we can learn to love every part of ourselves, the messy parts, the clunky parts, the parts that we're ashamed of, we can look at the world differently, and we can make a change by living differently with the way that we love ourselves. So that's what this book is about, and that's who this book is for. It's for anybody who feels lost or alone.
Well, I think that so many of us feel lost right now, right? And I think that on a regular basis. So I've spent time in the social space and online for a number of years, back in the mom blogging days and working in television. And I think there is such a challenge to present ourselves authentically and to make sure that we're acknowledging what's happening and trying to live with the joy in our lives and the challenges and helping those to intersect and still be us and figure out what that self-worth and that messy, clunky piece looks like. So what part of you decided this was a book that needed to come from you?
There's the part that when I realized that I I needed to recognize that even though I was uncomfortable in my skin for such a long time, like such a long time, even though it didn't appear that way. And in fact, I think I think a lot of people who are going to read this book who maybe think they know me really well are going to be very surprised because I put up such a good veneer. And I think there are a lot of people who walk around with a nice wall and a nice veneer. I wanted to write this book to say, like, you can pull that wall down. And I think this is a book that I needed a really long time ago, when I first went on this journey. And if I had this book many years ago, I mean, there's no way to go backwards, but it would have been nice to have this book, many years ago when I was feeling a little bit lost and alone. And when I was trying to figure out who I wanted to be, who I was in terms of my sexuality, who I was in terms of being a Black woman in the world and feeling lost and alone. And even in my initial career when I felt like I was the only Black person in the room. So I think that's when it was a seed that I wanted to tell my story, but I didn't know how. And then working at Rikers and then when I learned how to love myself, I think that's when I realized maybe this is the vehicle to finally be able to tell that story.
One of the things that struck me that I saw that you had said was that you teach what you needed to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that because I think that it's almost like a love letter to your former self.
It's interesting because there's such a part of me, and I show up this way when I teach, that there's always this part of me as a teacher who knows that I make mistakes and I fail a lot. Like, I'm clumsy a lot in my teachings, which is why I became a teacher. And, I know a lot of people say, like, oh, I try to be authentic. And I teach through stories and my own mistakes, and I'm rooted in all of the teachings. Like, I'm rooted in the Dharma. I'm rooted in what the Buddha talked about. But I have to learn from my mistakes because I don't think there's any other way to do it. And I used to be really nervous with teachers who had it all figured out, because if you have it all figured out, like, what can you teach me? Like, I'm really nervous about that. But a part of me also wasn't sure, like, should I be doing this? Is this the right way to do it? And yet I still just do it anyway. And I just kind of hope for the best. And I don't think I'm a teacher for everybody, and that's okay too. Like, I got comfortable with that. I don't think the way that I teach is for everybody. And that's something now that I'm older, I'm going to be 54 this year. And you get comfortable with that. You know what you know, your teacher point of view. Some people like it and some people don't. And I love that now too. And so I teach what I need to learn. And when it works, and sometimes it doesn't, and you learn.
That's the beauty of being the age we are. I just turned 53, so I'm right there with you, right? So we've earned where we are, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've earned the scars and the stripes and the hard work, and by putting in that time and heartache and all the laugh lines that come with it, we get to speak and teach and love from a place of lived experience. And that means that for some people, it will resonate, and for other people, it won't. And that's okay, because some people are going to hear your story, Onika, and think, oh my gosh, I'm hearing my story coming out of your mouth, and it will be exactly what they need. And other people will say, well, no, I'm curious about that because I hadn't thought about it that way. And other people will think, well, that doesn't sound right for me. And all of those are okay, so long as it's being approached with love and kindness.
Yep.
And I think that it sounds to me like that's the beauty of the book you've written.
I am so okay when people disagree with me now. It's shocking. I shock myself sometimes. My own response to things shocks me when I'm like, oh wow, this stuff really does work. And I think that's the beauty of your own practice. Like, when you can surprise yourself in the moment, right? Right. I think it was Sharon Salzberg who said, she's an incredible meditation teacher who actually I've read a lot, who teaches about metta, loving kindness. She says that meditation is practice for life. And so when you're living life and and your practice shows up in a moment of stress and you're like, oh, look, I responded differently. That's what I try to teach. And I learned so much of that at Rikers. Rikers taught me so much about how to live my life. And, I wrote about in the book how I was afraid that we would get to a point where we wouldn't be able to turn back. And I wrote about if the fighting starts, if there's violence. And I wrote this last year and where we are now, it really sort of gave me chills when I see where we are now, because I wrote this last year. And I said that Rikers was like a training ground for me, because I was in this environment where there was this hostility all of the time. And you have to figure out, what am I supposed to do? And you can't fight out there. The only thing that you can do is control yourself and love yourself. And you can stop harm that's happening in the world by living your life by your own morals and your own values and living your life as an example for other people to see. And I know that sounds really corny to say, but it is absolutely true. Like when people see that you live this way, they want to do the same thing. And I wouldn't have believed it. I wouldn't have believed it until I discovered it. So it's really changed my life, because I know there's people who know me from years ago who are probably like, this is not the same person who used to work at Barnes & Noble, who was my boss. I know this is going to happen.
No, but that's the beautiful thing about lived experience, right? It does change us because it stretches us and it forces us to look at things from a different perspective. And it puts us in a box, and then it forces us to fill and see whether or not we are capable of growing around some of the things that happen to us. Let's talk about your writing process a little bit. So you said this book was living inside you. And what was the writing process like?
The writing process was really challenging. There were parts that were really cathartic and just full of joy, and just, when I wrote 4 different proposals when I was going through this process. And when I landed on the last one, it sort of just downloaded into me. I was like, oh, I need to write this book like I'm teaching. And when that happened, it was almost like the book was just inside me, and then it was a matter of just getting it out. And there were parts that were really challenging. Like I wrote about a person who, I was in love with, who died overseas in Iraq. And when I wrote about that, it was really hard. And there were certain parts, working at Rikers, like I used to teach in solitary confinement. And so sort of reliving parts of it were really challenging. And then there were really joyful parts that brought it all back too, but in a really wonderful way. So it was reliving almost the 5 years that I was there again. And that was helpful because I didn't realize how much was still inside me, which also made me really grateful that I wasn't there anymore, because I didn't realize how much was still inside my body, and recognizing that people who do this kind of work need a lot of support that I realized that I didn't have. And I really want to advocate for people who are doing this kind of work, need so much support. And I recognize that in my own writing process. And I had so much support from people around me too during the writing process that I'm so grateful for. Friends, family, my partner. There were days that I was under the table trying to get it done, but we got there.
Now, you mentioned as well that it was not instantly picked up.
No, I had 15 really lovely rejections before Harper One said yes. And you learn from the rejections, though, because the 15 rejections weren't actually when I redid the proposal that we got actually the deal from. I think the first proposal that we went out with, it was too complicated. I think I was trying to write a proposal for a book that I wanted to read versus the book that I think was the book that should have been out there. It was almost like I was trying to fix something inside myself. So it was really complicated, and it was lovely and it was well written, but it was not appropriate. And I think it was maybe oversharing a little bit in places. And then I had this moment where I was like, this is too complicated. I'm known for being a teacher who makes complicated things accessible. So why don't I do that? And then it just dumped out. And then we went out with the new proposal that I wrote. And it was that next day we got an offer. And I was like, I need to remember who I am as a teacher, and I need to just stick with that. And it was so affirming.
Onika, how do you define hope?
Ooh, I've never been asked that. I think hope is the ability just to keep going when you think that you can't.
Have there been times in your life when you had to tap in to something like that?
Oh, yeah. I think about when my dad died, like that moment when my dad died, getting the phone call. I used to keep my phone on silent a lot. I was besides being a meditation teacher and a yoga teacher, I was a massage therapist as well. So I kept my phone on silent kind of all the time, much to the frustration of everybody in my life. One day it wasn't on silent. And it was the day that my dad died. And my mother called me and she said, I'm so glad your phone's not on silent. You need to come home right now. And I said, why? And she wouldn't tell me. And I knew. And when I was in an Uber on the way to my parents' house. And I remember saying, this is what it feels like when you're on your way to your parents' house to find out that your dad died. And I didn't think I would make it, but like magic, and it's not magic, it was my practice. Like I could feel hope drop in. I didn't think I was like, how am I going to get through without my dad for the rest of my life? Like, there's just no way. Like he was my hero, my mentor. And I was like, it felt so dark, but at the same time, I was like, well, Dad, you're just going to have to help me figure this out. So I think that was hope. Yeah.
You feel your dad with you still?
Oh, last night I was at an event with a dear friend, and we saw Misty Copeland speak. And it was amazing. And we saw these kids do this incredible dancing. It was a really wonderful event. And this jazz came on, and I felt myself start to just well up with tears, and I was out of nowhere. And I was like, ooh, what is that? And my friend Nicole said, oh, maybe it's your dad. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, it is. Like, and he just drops in all of the time. And I was like, oh, I think it must be. And she was like, yeah, he probably wants to see Misty. We just started laughing.
I love that you can add some levity to that, to his presence, to the love that he has when he shows up for you.
Oh yeah. He shows up a lot, and he was funny too. So yeah, you miss people, but you change the relationship when they're not in their body anymore. But I don't think it ever goes away. It's just a different kind of relationship you have with them.
In addition to the book, what else are you working on now?
I am writing a TV pilot that's loosely autobiographical, and I'm excited. It actually just won a grand jury prize at the Sherman Oaks Film Festival, so I'm starting to shop that around. It's about a young 15-year-old girl who grows up in a predominantly white neighborhood, and she's trying to like navigate her life. So I'm doing that. Still teaching retreats, and trying to figure it all out. To figure out what this next act is going to look like. It's been a lot of fun.
It. You know what? I'm excited for you, and I can't wait to see everything that you do next. Where can everyone find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Onika Mays, and they can also find me on Substack at Onika Mays.
That's fantastic. Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you'd like to share?
No, you are amazing. This was such a lovely conversation. Just a joy.
Thank you. It has equally been a joy. I mean, just from the moment, I don't know, I have these feelings from the moment I saw your face, right? I thought I need to speak to this woman. And then the more I read about your story, and the more I knew that I wanted to know more about you and what you were doing and how you were moving through the world. And I so appreciate you taking time and sharing with our community and talking to me. I'm grateful.
Thank you. I am too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And friends, thank you for spending time with us here on Hope Comes to Visit. I hope you have found the same level of hope and inspiration from Onika Mays as I have. Of course, you can find all the ways to connect with her in the show notes. And I hope that you will turn around and share this episode with the people you love the most and leave a review if you feel like it. I always love to hear what you guys have to say. And until I get to spend time with you next time, please take very good care of you. Thank you for being here.
Naturally, it's important to thank the people who support and sponsor the podcast. This episode is supported by Chris Dully, a trusted criminal defense attorney and friend of mine here in St. Louis, who believes in second chances and solid representation. Whether you're facing a DWI, felony, or traffic issue, Chris handles your case personally, with clarity, compassion, and over 15 years of experience. When things feel uncertain, it helps to have someone steady in your corner. Call 314-384-4000 or 314-DUI-HELP, or you can visit dullylawfirm.com to schedule your free consultation.